record. All right, ladies and gentlemen, fellow students, I am here with an old acquaintance of mine from Redbird Nation. This is Sherri Kirk, and Sherri is actually someone I met through ISU's chemistry department. And Sherri has gone on into the field of chemistry far beyond me and just the education world. So Sherri, thanks so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're honored to have you, and we love learning from different people's experiences and paths. So without me talking way too much about you and you getting into your story, could you tell us a little bit about maybe how you got interested in the world of chemistry and then eventually kind of the path you took with ISU and beyond to get to where you are today?
Sure. So I actually applied to ISU as a math major. I thought that I wanted to be a math teacher. And I started taking math courses freshman year, and I was also interested in sciences. So I was taking chemistry as well. And ultimately, I decided math was not for me, mostly because I was not very good at it.
Fair enough.
And so I kind of started going down the chemistry path. I think I actually ended up changing my major roughly 7 times in college. So if you don't know what you're doing right away, it's totally cool. I ranged anywhere from math, physics, speech pathology and audiology, physics education, pre-pharmacy. And then I realized that I really loved the idea of like drug discovery. And so I started doing chemistry, and I realized I don't want to be a pharmacist. I want to actually do the work behind what happens in making drugs and things like that. And so I pursued my my chemistry degree and went straight into my master's, doing organic synthesis, but in an inorganic lab, which was pretty cool.
So could you tell us, forgive me, organic synthesis, what in layman's terms, kind of what does that mean? Are you just creating new molecules or?
Yeah, so essentially what we were doing was very basic chemistry, understanding like how an element works and being able to take, so what we did, we would take a metal, and so a metal can have multiple coordination sites where you can put different other molecules attached to it. Okay. And so it was very fundamental, understanding how can I control this metal and how can I control what gets attached to it. And so a lot of it was making the base molecules and then seeing what happens when I added them directly onto a metal. And so I did a lot of instrumentation, or used a lot of instrumentation to identify what I was putting on the molecules. And it was just fun, like working in the lab and just trying to figure it out, solve a problem, and it was pretty neat. And so then from there, after my master's, I wrote a thesis on what the work that I had done, and straight out of my master's, I got a job working at a pharmaceutical company.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah, and so I worked there. I was actually the 5th person who started in that job, so it was a startup. It was working with generic drugs that had already existed. So a lot of what I was doing was not brand new, but it was brand new in that they were looking to take existing drugs, and instead of them being in a pill form, how can we make them into like a nebulizer or a cough syrup? So just finding different ways to take the same drug and put it into, different types of drugs.
Wow. Is there like a game plan when you're like, all right, we're going to take this and make it into cough syrup? Do you have like a game plan, or is it like sleeves rolled up, let's start dissolving this and seeing what this active ingredient does in this oil or something like that? How does that work?
Well, so a lot of it is, people's past experiences. So reading up on literature and understanding, this type of drug is going to be soluble in this type of matrix, like an oil matrix.
Okay.
And so basically taking what you've learned, through your career and through reading literature, and then just going into the lab and seeing if it works and tweaking things a little bit. It's a lot like doing formulation. It's a lot like cooking.
Okay.
And so, but you're cooking without a recipe. So you're just kind of like adding things in and seeing what happens. And so knowing, you know, what you've learned in the past and what you learned in literature to then apply it obviously helps. But a lot of it is just, you know,
try it out. That's awesome. No, that's great. So this is a pharmaceutical company that was trying to take something and make it in a different form, but also generic. And by generic, do you just mean it's not name brand, so it's more affordable?
Yeah. So it's already, so the drug was already existing in the in industry. You could have bought it, and so we then took it, and because there is a name brand, when you then go and make the same thing, you might have different, same raw material, maybe different supplier, then you could be named generic. And so it was already like an existing drug that we just kind of modified a little bit.
No, thank you for clarifying that. I think pharmaceutical is obviously a huge opportunity with the world of chemistry. And I think a lot of my students are interested in something related to medicine or the medical field. But I try to tell them that you don't have to necessarily be a doctor or a nurse practitioner or nurse to be in the medical field. You could be, like you said, not the pharmacist, but the person who creates it that eventually gets the pharmacist's hand. So I think that's something it's easily overlooked because in chem class, you know, we're just learning chem and we forget like that there's a lot of jobs that go into getting it into the doctor's hands. So that was cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked in that role for about 3 or 4 years, and it actually moved me to Phoenix, Arizona. So I lived there for probably 3 years. And then I actually was looking to come back to the Chicago area. Shocking, I know, you know, from beautiful Arizona, but and I got a job with another startup that took natural oil and would do metathesis and make essentially petroleum alternatives.
Okay.
So,
and by petroleum, guys, what exactly are we talking, just in case they're not following you completely on petroleum and metathesis?
okay. Yeah. So, well, petroleum-based products, you know, come from, you know, drilling oils. And so we would take soybean oil, and there's a process called metathesis where it essentially you react it with a catalyst. Okay. And then you take the oil. So an oil is like a triglyceride. It's got like these long chains, but they also have double bonds in them. And so the catalyst would essentially break up those double bonds and make short chain carbons and then longer chain. And so based on where the double bond was, we could kind of control the chain length of the carbon molecules that we wanted. And so what we would make, it would be like paraffins, which is just a long chain carbon structure that is very popular in cosmetics. Mm-hmm. And then there's also a lot of what we were making were things that were going to polymers. So essentially what we would make would be like a building block that somebody else could then take and make something from. But rather than be from drilling oils, they were from a natural source, which is obviously renewable and very important for the environment. And so I did a lot of, actually started there building the process to build a biorefinery.
Wow.
So yeah, so I worked with engineers to develop the actual method in which they were going to do the metathesis, how they were going to then make the shorter chains, because you had to do it like distillation, so you had to separate things from itself. And so we developed the process and the conditions to do that. And then we actually in 2013 made the first world scale biorefinery that used metathesis.
Well, that's awesome to have your mark on that.
Yeah. And so then we were able to make these materials, and then I worked, I transitioned more from a synthesis role to a business development role where so now we have these molecules. I need to go talk to customers and see if they're interested in it. And so I actually worked as a project manager for it was a C10 methyl ester. So it's just a long chain with an ester at the end. and it worked as a solvent. And so it actually is a really good cleaner, and it went into things like what you would see somebody doing on the street to like clean asphalt off or grease off something. And actually, we also worked with another company that took it further, derivatized it, and made a pharmaceutical.
Wow.
So it all comes back, right? I worked in pharma, and then now again, I'm working with another company in pharma. And so that was really successful. And I actually worked as the quality manager there. So I made sure that the things coming off the biorefinery and anything else we made was made, according to what our customers wanted. And so, yeah, I worked there for about 10 years.
Wow.
And just recently I took a new role as a lab manager for a metalworking fluids company. Very similar chemicals. So
Okay.
natural oils, esters, and these go into essentially machines that make metal parts need some type of like lubrication in
Sure.
order to keep the machine working, and making sure like when they cut the metal, that you're not dulling a blade or things like that. So lubrication of metal working parts is really important. And so I actually work at a plant in Bedford Park. There's about 20 people there. And I kind of lead the laboratory. We have, a QC, which is quality control, again, back to my quality manager role.
Yeah.
And then we also have what we refer to as CTS, which is customer technical service. And so we have a chemist there who essentially goes with the salespeople, says, oh, if you're interested in this, I can make a formulation. Again, back to, there's lots of formulations in metalworking industry and pharmaceuticals and cleaners. And so I lead the team that works with the salespeople and works with the plant to make sure that what we're making is exactly what the customer wants.
Wow. Now this current place, I know the last place started from soybean oil. Is this petroleum based, something from the ground or from an oil, or that's natural, or is it
So
all of the above?
the majority of it is actually natural, which I didn't know that until I actually started. I assumed that metalworking fluids were petroleum based, but actually a majority of it is natural oils like castor oil,
Yeah.
and also it's like tree oil, where when they start making paper from like pulp,
Yeah.
it has like an oil residue, and so we actually sell it. We buy it, and then we further polymerize it. So we take the molecule and make it bigger, and then it goes into soap.
Wow.
Yeah.
And beards, maybe that tree oil for thick beard.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So surprisingly, a lot of that industry is natural oil, which I wasn't even aware of until I started there.
That's awesome. I through your journey now, you've been to different places and you've had different jobs, and they've all overlapped. Would you say that with your master's, and your master's was officially in chemistry? Would that be the title?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that opened a variety of doors that allowed you to jump from one experience to another?
Yeah, I think the key I found was that I did undergraduate research in a laboratory with a professor, and that really exposed me to, what it's like to work in a lab and to like act, like I said, like a recipe that doesn't actually have a recipe, but just like figuring things out, playing around, and just being inquisitive. That made me go into getting my master's and being able to spend 2 years working in a lab and like having a project and having like a hypothesis and testing it out, improving it, and then finding the conclusion. And I realized, oh wow, this is something that's super cool, and like being able to have a story, a beginning, middle, and end. That was part of my favorite part of my second job, which was at the natural base biorefinery, was because I saw it start from the beginning, and then it progressed to an actual final product that like a customer was using, which was really cool to see, that you see the whole part of like a new product come about.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I would say one thing, I want to give a plug to ISU Chemistry because I think they do a great job of allowing undergraduate research when
Yes.
not all universities have that available because there's so much crowding with graduate work in that undergrads don't get the opportunity. But I felt like they really made you feel invited when I started there, that you could get into research if you wanted to, which isn't always the experience at every university. So that's
Right.
cool you got to experience that. Were you with Dr. Greg Ferentz?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
the
Yep.
man.
The
And
man.
then also, I wanted to talk about when you were doing this recipe in that. And I think that's why a lot of chemists, I love to bake and cook. And I
Yeah.
think it's not a surprise. They overlap, like you said. But what is it like when you're trying to make that formula and recipe? I mean, it can't just happen the next day. So is there a lot of failure involved? Is there a lot of scratching your head, frustration? Could you kind of walk through that process of what that's like to create that formulation?
Yeah. So my big saying is, and when I tell, the people I work with is, when you're working with something and it's brand new, all data matters, right? Everything, whether it's good or bad, because it helps you to figure out, what avenues to take. So when you're working with like a formulation, a lot of what we're doing now is determining whether formulations are stable. So you'll mix things up. Sometimes you got to like heat it up to get it into solution. A lot of metalworking fluid is oil and water. Oil and water are separate, and so you have to use a lot of chemicals to get them to be one solution. And so you're bound to fail, and you're bound to find things that aren't stable. And it's just a matter of tweaking things at a certain percentage, and you're always going to walk in and see something that works and then walk in and see something that doesn't. And then you just got to tweak the recipe a little bit. Oh, I put this in at 10%. Maybe I need to back off and put it in at 5%, or maybe I need to increase it to 15%. And so it's all a matter of understanding that you're going to fail, and failure is good because it helps you to transition into a different thought process that will eventually be successful.
Yeah, it's true. That's that famous, everyone quotes Edison. He made 900 ways not to make a light bulb, but really he was just figuring out what worked and what didn't. And I think that's an excellent point and something that we don't do the greatest in high school chemistry. We set them up for success. We give them a reaction that we know is going to work and be successful. And I think probably that failure side of things is when we really started learning it in college and organic and inorganic labs, when you spent these hours and it didn't work out, it's part of the process. So that's really great you mentioned. I want to respect your time. I appreciate you coming on so much. Just really quick as a wrap up, perhaps, are there any skills or ideas that you would suggest to high school students, maybe interested in the field of science, or anything at all that you've learned over the years that's important for any job or whatever, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think that when you go into college, I think it's important. Maybe you have a mindset of what you want to do. And I think it's important you go in and take a course that you probably normally wouldn't take, just because it might actually spark an interest in you. I also think that if you really are interested in chemistry, go to a professor and knock on their door or find their office hours and just go and be like, this is what I'm really interested in. And it could open up a door for you. I'm a big proponent of women in sciences, and I try to volunteer at schools and talk to students about the sciences. I think it's important to keep that interest, because when it comes down to it, everything is made out of chemicals. We're all made out of chemicals. So if you really have an interest and you just got to ask questions and find people who may not know the answer, but are willing to steer you in a direction. But yeah, I think that I've always been a simplistic person. And so I think chemistry works for me because I always want to understand and get down to what's like the bottom line. And it is that we're all just made of chemicals.
Yeah. I think that's well said. And you highlighted some really great things like leaning in, asking questions. And we've had other people interview as well who have mentioned like the worst thing that could happen when you ask someone a question is they could either say no, they could say yes, or they could simply answer it or say they don't know. But you don't know until you ask, and you find that it's not really that horrible of a feeling if you ask for an opportunity and they just say no, you move on. So taking advantage of that, I think people who are passionate and step into life like that tend to get to where they're going much faster. So I think that's wonderful advice. I appreciate you bringing that up. So Sherri, I want to really thank you for the opportunity. It's nice to see you. I'm so glad we ran into each other randomly at Costco like a year ago. But go ISU Redbirds. Go to good luck with everything during these strange times in quarantine. But again, thanks so much for just giving us a glimpse into what your daily jobs have been like, because I think this opens up a door, an avenue for my students to see if they might fit in that world as well. So thanks so much for your time.
No problem. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm going to hit unrecord.